Hey everyone, and welcome to MBA Waves. This is episode 51. We just celebrated 1 year of MBA Waves with my partner, Bara Sapir. My name is Eric. I'm your host for today, and we have a special guest named Pamela Jaffe who's joining us. Today's subject is letters of reference. What are they about? Who to ask, when, and how to go about it. So before we introduce Pam, I'm just going to let Bara introduce herself and take it away.
Hi, I'm Bara Sapir. I'm with City Test Prep and MindFlow. I'm CEO of both of those companies. And we are a test prep company that helps students on standardized tests, GMAT, GRE, and EA. And MindFlow is a speed reading apparatus. It's an online platform. So we help students read faster when it counts the most.
Excellent, especially on reading those GMAT questions. I look forward to talking about that in the future.
So. Yes, we'll definitely be talking about that soon.
Excellent. So once again, my name is Eric. I'm the founder of Candidate Coach, and I'm a boutique admissions consulting firm helping MBA and master's students all over the world, and also the author of the Getting Into an MBA book series. It's like a country-specific guidebook to take you through all the steps in researching, applying for, and getting into your MBA. And last but not least, we have today's featured guest, Pamela Duffy. Hi, Pam. Tell us where you are.
Hi, nice to meet everyone. My name is Pamela Jaffe. I'm founder of the Jaffe Advantage, relatively new company. We've been around for about 4 years, but I've been in this business since 2010. Had a bit of a dual career path. After business school, I went into a career in strategy consulting. And in 2010, I, in parallel, started working part-time for MBA Admissions and continued working in both for MBA Admissions and for myself part-time next many years. And then I decided that my passion for admissions consulting won over my passion for Fortune 500 strategy. And I opened the Jaffe Advantage, which is a full-service admissions consulting firm.
And Pamela, with Jaffe, you can work from anywhere. Tell us where you are right now.
Well, so I live in New York City, but I'm currently working from Mexico City.
Amazing. Well,
incredible.
All over the world. Bara is always in the Bay Area.
Yeah. Oh, and I also used to live in Paris. So that's my long time ago, but I also lived in Paris. I'm jealous he's still there.
Hopefully we'll see you back in Paris. That's where I'm normally based. And currently I'm in beautiful, sunny Long Island at my brother's house, drinking coffee out of his wife's mug.
I just have a dog mug, and I've got my foster dog next to me right now.
Nice. Yeah, I have a dog right here too. Hopefully he keeps quiet. All right, so let's jump right into the questions. Again, this episode at MBA Waves is all about letters of reference. So let's talk about the letters of reference or recommendations. What do they serve in this process? And that's always our guests have the first crack at answering, but Bara and I might jump into with some responses. So leading to Pam.
The most important thing about a letter of recommendation is really that it's, in most applications, it's one of the few opportunities to talk about your accomplishments at work. There are some exceptions, but most of the applications today don't really ask you a lot about your experience. They ask you what you do for fun. They ask you what you want to do, but there's very little opportunity to talk about your accomplishments other than on your resume. So the letters of reference serve as a way for somebody in your company to talk about your accomplishments for you, so that the school can understand what it is that you've done for them and what you might be able to do in the future.
Nice. And so how much weight would you say that the reference letters have in the overall application?
So I'm going to give a very consultant answer. It depends. It depends on the school. Some schools think it gives more weight than others. Second of all, it really depends on the application itself. There's certain schools like Stanford, for example, where you've got 6 essays and you've got a couple of chances to talk about accomplishments at work. Then you've got other essays, such as Harvard, where you could write an entire essay without ever mentioning work at all. And in that case, the letters of reference are going to have a lot more impact than they are in, say, Stanford, where you've already talked about it. So it really depends. Nevertheless, treat everything, including the letters of reference, as if it's the most important thing there is.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's a tricky line when you're consulting or advising someone on what to do, and they ask for that question about importance and so forth. It is not to say that they are not important. They do play an important role, just like the GMAT, the essays, the interview, and so forth. So In most cases, how many reference letters are usually asked for by school?
So again, that depends. This is going to be my favorite answer. Traditionally, most schools have asked for 2. However, schools are trending towards 1. There are a few schools such as Columbia, such as MIT, such as Ross that have started to ask for 1. And the most recent information I've heard from the admissions consultants at our recent conference is that they seem to be veering towards thinking about 1 letter. They really get most of the information they need from the first letter. That said, it hasn't happened yet. So most likely you're going to have 2, at least for now.
I agree. I'm seeing that trend as well. Most schools do want 2, but I'm seeing more and more asking for 1. And it's all about, being efficient and getting things done quickly. They have a huge number of applicants and they have to go through all these elements and so forth. So to make things as streamlined, as simple as possible. I also wanted to add that, if a school asks for 2, give 2. Don't give 1, don't give 3. 1, give 1. Sometimes you think you're providing more and giving more strength to your application, but you might actually be harming it because you're not following directions.
No, never, ever, ever give more than the school asks. They have a lot to read. You want to respect that.
100%. So how does it work? Are we talking paper and stamps here in the mail, or like?
That reminds me when I went to business school and you had the paper and stamps and you had to have your recommender sign the back of the envelope so you knew that they assigned it.
Right.
No, I have yet to see a business school
Seal.
What?
I think a wax seal, like in the medieval time, maybe a little perfume.
Exactly. I'm really aging myself here. So I can't speak for every school, but I have yet to work with a school that is asking for paper and stamps today. It's electronic. Generally speaking, when you open the application, there's a reference section. You simply put in the email of your reference, and then they receive an email with all the instructions that they need.
Right. That makes me think of something else. Like, usually you see the due date for the application, but if the application submission, the action of submitting is what triggers the reference thing, how does it work as far as timing? Is the reference allowed to come in later, or?
No, generally speaking, there's exceptions to everything. The letter of recommendation needs to be there. I am sorry, I'm a consultant. I can't help this. It depends. The letter of recommendation needs to be there when the deadline hits. Now, granted, there are some really one-off exceptions, but just try to get it there before, latest the day that the application's due. Because most schools, the application is not considered complete until the letter of reference is in.
Right. I definitely seen a fair amount of exceptions, but it's important to know that. So if it's not clear on the website, you absolutely have to ask the admissions counselor or recruiter. And I would do it in email, so you have a written trace of what they've said in case there's a conflict in what you've been told and what the reality might be. So factor in enough buffer time for your references to get that stuff in.
And I would add, always, always, always make sure that you check the website, because there are so many exceptions to every single rule for every school, for every round. And sometimes even the admissions consultant doesn't know it because they change it round to round. You should always be 100% focused on making sure that you have that information from admissions.
Yep.
Do they still have the that you waive?
Yeah, so that's an important thing, and I get a lot of questions about that. When you put in the letter of reference, the recommender, the school asks, do you waive your right to see the recommendation? And basically what that means is, if you're accepted to the school, can you go into the admissions office after and say, hey, can I see my letter of recommendation? I highly recommend that you waive your right to see the letter of recommendation. What that means is you're telling the school, I'm comfortable that my boss is aware that whatever he writes, the school does not have the right to show me. And that shows the school that you're comfortable, that, you're fine with whatever your boss said or whoever your recommender is, and that whoever the recommender is was able to write the letter without worrying that you'd ever see it. So always, always waive your right to see the letter of recommendation.
I think it indicates a certain level of trust that you have in the referee, that they can say what they want freely about you, that they feel that the referee can feel comfortable to write what they really mean, and it's not going to be filtered by their fear of it coming back to you. So definitely recommended. Would there be any reason to not check that box?
Honestly, no. I can't think of one.
Yeah,
I mean, I'm sure there is, but I've never come across any situation where somebody needed to not waive that.
Well, this leads me kind of to my next question, which is about who should you ask and so forth. Who's the best person to ask? And I guess I'll just give the first response: somebody that you absolutely trust, that you're sure, 100% sure, has positive things to say about you, and only positive things, right? But beyond that, I'll turn it back to Pamela. Who are the right people to ask?
So first of all, you want to make sure that you follow the directions. A lot of schools want at least one letter from a direct manager. And that's usually because that's the person who sees most of your work day to day. Now, that's not always feasible. There's many situations where you can't do that. You work for a family business, your direct boss is your dad. You work for yourself, you don't have a direct boss. You just started at a new company, you're not telling them you want to leave. So there's lots of exceptions. But generally speaking, if the school, which in most cases it does, asks for your direct manager, you should either use your direct manager or find somebody as close to your direct manager as possible and write an optional essay explaining why you can't use that direct manager. If there is a second letter of recommendation and or there's no direction as to who you should use, you want to use somebody who, one, very greatly respects you, two, who knows your work, not just somebody who likes you, but somebody who can actually speak to what you do on a day-to-day basis. And three, somebody who's going to put effort into the letter. You really want somebody who's engaged in what you're doing and who's going to take the time to write a good letter, not just scribble something at the last minute.
Yep, absolutely. The comment came in from Dr. Melina Corcoran, who is also a fantastic admissions consultant. And you see what she wrote there. An interesting aside is that Europeans are always confused about this because they don't know that in the US they have the right to see the LOR, letter of recommendation.
Oh, that's interesting. I was not aware of that. But yes, you do have a right to see it here, but you should. That's the best I can say.
So she continues on. So my clients get excited at the idea that they might see it and they think they shouldn't waive the right to see the letter. So because not everyone's coming from the US and doesn't necessarily know the codes, the customs and so forth. So it's, we definitely speak to a global audience in MBA Waves. And thank you, Marlena.
Yeah, Marlena,
frankly, a lot of my American clients aren't aware of it either because they don't really, they trust their boss trusts them. They don't think anything of it. So I try to make sure to tell everyone, just waive the right. There's no reason not to.
For sure. For me, the two rules as far as who to ask is it has to be someone who knows you in a professional capacity and it has to be someone who knows you well. As Pamela already said, your direct report is the ideal person, but very often it's the case that your company, your boss doesn't know that you're planning to do an MBA and you can't disclose that information yet. So this is not weird at all. This is, business schools are very much used to applicants not being able to ask for direct reports. So, I'm thinking of some alternatives, like a former supervisor would be a good one. Pam also mentioned the situation if you're working for a family business or if you're if you're an entrepreneur, you don't have a boss, right? So some good people to think about, again, people who know you professionally and who know you well would be perhaps a regular client, customer, a buyer, a provider, someone who you've worked with for a long time, who understands your work ethic, understands your character, that you get along well with people, that you're responsible, reliable, that you deliver, all of these traits. I think the reference often serves as sort of like a character witness, per se, in your application, that someone besides you thinks you're great.
It's interesting, Eric, because it's like when I think about day to day, not like people who I work with or, who are part of my team, I don't always know what their day to day is, but I know what their deliverables are, right? And I know their work ethic because I get a sense of it. So it is interesting because Pamela, you specifically said someone who knows your day to day. And I would imagine in some of the workplaces, if people are traveling a lot, you might not know, like their bosses might not specifically know their day to day because they're not in the office all the time, or they don't have that kind of tracking that they're able to do.
Yeah. So two things about that. First of all, I think, the person has to think about their situation. Even if they do have a direct boss, if that person's traveling all the time and they don't really know them, or maybe it's a new person, they just came on 3 months ago, they don't know that person, it might not be the right person to ask. And that's absolutely fine as long as you explain it. The other thing is, and this is especially in consulting where you're project-based, a lot of times you can ask one person and then they can ask other people in the company for their points of view. And so maybe it's your direct boss who's doing it, but they're asking people who work with you on different projects to give their, and that's absolutely okay as well.
Mhm.
Something I wanted to address, because a lot of people are very uncomfortable with asking for letters of reference. So let's talk about some advice and tips we can give on how to go about that. Like, what's the best way to go about asking someone once you've identified the people that you'd like to ask? For those that know what we're doing, what's the best way to go about it, Pam?
Sure. So I usually recommend do a staged approach. I don't think you should ever say, hey, I'm going to leave a company, do an MBA, and would you like a letter of recommendation in one sitting?
Right.
My recommendation is try to find a really great time to talk to your boss, set up a meeting, set up a coffee, depending upon what the relationship is between you and your boss, and just talk to them about the fact that you want to get an MBA, why you want to get an MBA, get their buy-in, get their understanding, get their, your feeling for what they think about it. Then once you've had that discussion, say, hey, would you mind writing a letter of recommendation? Then if they say yes, take another meeting later to talk more about the specifics of the letter of recommendation.
Right.
I really advise not going in just being like, hey, I'm applying to business school. Here's all the information you need.
I totally agree with you. Could you go in a little bit more detail why you would recommend against that?
I think it takes people back. First of all, you want the person on your side. You want their buy-in. You're just telling your boss, thanks for training me. I'm going to leave the company and you're going to have to find somebody new. So would you help me do that? You really want them on your side. You want them to be invested in your career. You want them to do it. So the best thing you can do is talk to them about why you're getting an MBA, get them to be on your side, be a partner in the process. Then they're going to be more invested in writing the letter of recommendation. It's a little bit less transactional and it ends up having a better letter.
Totally. Yeah, I think going in steps is absolutely the right approach. Just think about it. You've had all this time that you've been thinking about doing an MBA, maybe even years in advance. And, in the recent months, you've been very much thinking about it. You've been doing research, alumni, all the right things, and so forth. And then you just drop this bomb. They haven't had a chance to process. So I think, especially if it's your boss, it's going to have a direct impact on their work life. So very, I think, a mature approach to go about it that way. I also like to recommend.
I'm sorry, Eric. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No worries. I was just going to add that taking them out for a coffee or a lunch is a nice approach. A touch of class. It shows a bit of appreciation. Continue to foster that relationship. This is not in any way meant to sound like a bribe. I'm not saying take them to a lobster dinner or a 7-day cruise around the Caribbean. I'm talking about coffee or a little pasta for lunch is a nice touch to spend time together. Remind them of your professional achievements and share some stories about how you've worked together. That'll just foster the relationship. It'll help them to help you, basically, right? Give them fodder material to talk about in your essays. And then, of course, talking about your goals, why you want to do an MBA, why at this time, why this school, what are your goals after the MBA? Because that's what it's all about, right? The MBA is a bridge. You don't get on a bridge to stand on it. You go on a bridge to cross over to the other side. So help them understand, why you're going through this process, and it will help them shape their answer about you.
I was also going to say that. Oh, I'm sorry, Bara. Now I keep interrupting.
No. It's an interesting format, right? This online chatting. I would also say I wonder if language plays a role in this also. Like, you could say, would you write me a letter of recommendation, or going the approach that Eric is talking about, I would love if you would consider writing me a letter of recommendation. Like, I wonder if languaging has any impact where you're talking about how much you appreciate the boss and the role that they've had in developing and forming who you've become. And wow, it would be so meaningful to me if you would consider doing that, versus, wow, would you write me a letter of recommendation? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I absolutely think so. And I think a lot of this also depends on the situation. If you're in the US, if you're in consulting, if you're in banking, your boss is expecting it. It's not going to be a surprise. But if you're coming from a non-traditional career, if you're coming from a startup where you're really making a difference in that company, if you're coming from a country or an industry where people don't go and get an MBA, you're going to have to approach it really differently. And then I do think the language is really important. I think if you're an analyst at a bank, they kind of see it coming. So but yes, absolutely. I do think that you want that to make them feel special, not
Exactly, yeah.
everything on your plate. But I chose you to do this because
Exactly.
we have a good relationship.
Yeah.
Speaking of language, for those whose recommenders are coming from outside of the country, it might be a little bit intimidating for them in terms of supporting them in doing this. So the first thing I want to reassure applicants is that you will not be judged by spelling or grammar mistakes by your recommender if he or she is a non-native English speaker. You don't have to worry about that. Schools are used to receiving letters from countries all over the world where English is not the first language. And they are taking time to do this favor for you and for the school to make sure that the right fit, is happening in terms of the admission process. So they're not going to be judged and you will not be penalized. In addition to that, I'm just going to mention that Pamela, Bara and I are all associated with AGAC. And for those of you who don't know, AGAC is the Association of International Graduate Admissions Counselors. And we have, how can I say this? Information translated into most major languages that supports people who are writing their recommendation letters. So if you, as an applicant, are looking for some support in the native language of the person who's writing the language, that can be provided if you're working with an AGAC admissions counselor or consultant, I should say. So that's interesting to think about.
That's great. I didn't know that AGAC had that. That's such a great
I didn't either. So that's good information.
Eric is a newer member, so he's gone through the treasure troves. Probably.
Yeah, they have it. It's on the AGAC platform, Advice for Recommenders, and it's in English, Spanish, French, German, Portuguese, Chinese, Japanese, and Hindi. It's pretty cool. Yeah, I'm impressed.
There are so many resources available when you start looking, but it is good to get good resources, right? You want valuable, ethical resources, which AGAC has.
One other thing I want to mention is, as Eric said, your recommender is not applying to business school. So as long as the content's there, the business school is not going to be judging the grammar. However, in a few cases, if the recommender really doesn't speak English well and they really don't feel comfortable, it is a possibility to get an official translation. It's not the recommender writing it and you translating it, but they can write it in their original language and they have an official recommendation. There's an entire process for it. Doesn't happen a lot, but I have had one or two candidates go through that.
Sure. So, all right, let's say the school is only allowing one recommendation letter. So what if you have to decide between like your direct manager and say the VP of the company who knows you a bit as well? What do you think, Pam?
The person who can speak to what you do better. Schools don't care about titles. They care about what you do. Everyone's recommender is going to say they're great. They want to know why you're great. So if you worked with the VP, kind of knows you, but your direct manager can speak to, your projects at a very, detailed level and really explain why you succeeded, then I'd go with the direct manager. But if the direct manager is just seeing you, day to day doing models and the VP is seeing you in meetings, interacting with clients, then I'd go with the VP. So don't worry about the title, worry about who is actually seeing your best work. And it's usually going to be the direct manager, but there are exceptions.
100%. I think a lot of people have the inkling to go for a higher title, and they'll even seek out the highest title they could possibly get because they think it's going to impress, and it's really not the case.
No.
Just because I give this silly example every time, but just because you rode the elevator once with the CEO, he or she definitely does not know you enough to write your reference. Like, it's about somebody who knows you deeply and professionally.
Yes.
All right.
That's really valuable information. Like that's like the Post-it note that I think that listeners should take note of.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Yep. So, okay, what do you do in this situation? Like, say your referee has told you like 10 times that he or she would do it, but he or she has not been reacting and the deadline is approaching. What do you do?
So I think you need to take a dual approach. One, I think you need to sit down with that recommender, see what the issue is, see if there's anything you can do to help them. And when I say help them, I don't mean write the letter of recommendation, but is there anything you can do to make their life easier? You know, have their assistant do something for you, give them, whatever, give them information on results, whatever it is that you can make it easier. But I also think you should start looking into a backup. Ask the recommender 10 times and they haven't gotten a letter of recommendation to you, then and you're starting to worry, you need to have a backup because at the end of the day, the school doesn't care. If there's no letter of recommendation, the application is not complete.
Correct. Okay. Yeah. And you mentioned about like not like having he or she, not writing it for he or she. So like, let's say the referee, the person writing a reference says they'll do it, but then they ask you, the applicant, to write it and he'll just sign it. Risky?
Yeah, so I think you need to figure out why that person's asking you to do it. First of all, some recommenders actually do it because they think they're doing the applicant a favor, and they're really not. Because interestingly, usually the recommender often has a perspective that the applicant hasn't even thought about. So see if that's even why they're doing it. If they're doing it because they think you're doing a favor, or they're doing it because they just don't want to. But if they just don't want to do it, unfortunately, that doesn't work. You're not allowed to write your own letters of recommendation. Right. So sit down with your recommender and see what you can do. What?
Like, that's totally normal. Right? You shouldn't.
Yeah. But you can make it easy for your recommender and talk to them about what you can do to make it easy. So, for example, what are the qualities? And these are things you should probably do anyway. What are the qualities that you think are strengths that you'd like to see? What are some of the projects you've worked on? Because remember, a project you worked on 2 years ago might be top of mind for you, but it might not be top of mind for your manager who's managing 5 other people.
Good point.
So remind them of the projects you've worked on. Remind them of your role. Remind them of the results. If you can give them the information, then they can add their perspective on how you did, but they might not have time to dig for what % profit increase was on a project 3 years ago that, it's just not top of mind for them. So see how to make it as easy as possible.
Very well stated.
Absolutely. What?
So that was very well stated. Thank you.
Sure. Now, if they absolutely insist that they don't have time, try to explain why you can't write it yourself. Unfortunately, and this doesn't happen a lot, if they truly won't do it, you're just going to have to find somebody else. Yeah. But I find that most of the time, as long as you make it easy for them and you don't have them spending time digging for information and remembering things that, it just takes time, they'll usually write it.
Look, if a recommender is asking you to do it, this is not the person down to. And, the reality is that most of the times they'll do it, they'll get it done for you, but sometimes major things come up and they just literally can't. They might tell you straight away, like, look, this is happening. I'm sorry, but I can't. And that's a bombshell that you have to deal with. Like, this has come up, but I'll get it done.
I'm sorry, Eric. There's a lot of wind. I can't hear you.
Sorry. Yeah, I forgot. I've been gauging by how much Bara's hair is blowing. Should I put her on mute or not? There's a breeze in the Bay Area.
I could to the non-windy area. I might do that momentarily.
I'm sorry. I just couldn't hear anything you said.
Well, good, Bara. We're almost done. Now I lost my train of thought.
About your recommender, yeah.
Well, yeah. If the recommenders, told you that something's major come up, but they're really trying to do it anyway, and they're just kind of stringing you along, this is even more stressful because you're just kind of like, tell me or not, I'll move on. But so I think it's a wise idea to have 1 or 2 backups. Yeah. People that you can talk to, say, look, this is what's going on. I had someone agree to do this, but I have my doubts if it's going to happen. And this is extremely important. Would you mind if I had you on call to be my backup referender? And that's, you have to go about that delicately because you don't want this person to feel like they're your second choice, even though they probably are. But you want to frame it as, it's not that they're your second choice, but this person makes more sense in the context of what you're trying to do. It's not about your personal feelings to this person. It's just about the role that they played in your career. that it makes more sense for this application. You have to,
Also remember, and I don't advise this often, but schools admissions committees are human beings. So for example, last year I had a client whose recommender had all good intentions of doing it during Christmas and came down with a horrible case of COVID for 2 weeks. She actually called the school and she got an extension. So see what the reason is. It's not going to be the majority of the time, but if it's something that's really reasonable, like, your recommender ended up in the hospital, call the school.
All right. So let's say despite all good intentions, what if the letter of recommendation does not arrive in time?
Call the school. But I hate to say this, you need to do everything in your power to manage that won't happen. If you don't see it arriving a week before, you need to get on there, call the boss every day, find somebody else to write it. Unfortunately, 99% of the time, it is going to be your responsibility regardless.
Yeah. Also, I think this level of strictness, I think more applies to like top 10 or top 20 schools. Whereas schools that are not in that category, sometimes, this is not always, there's always exceptions, but you get a sense of this by speaking to other alumni and current students, a little bit more flexibility. I think in the US, it's a little bit more strict as well too, because they tend to have more applicants, and it can be a method. I'm not saying it is, but it might be a method for some schools to filter those who are not timely. They say, well, they can't get their stuff together on time. Then that's one method of filtering out, just when you have so many applicants and you have limited seats. So again, as always, Pam is not right, not wrong. It depends.
I mean, look, at the end of the day, they're looking for managers. And if you're a manager in a company, you're at the end of the day responsible for getting everything done. And this is a very similar process. One thing I'd add to is think about whether it's round one or round two. If you're round one and you have to go into round two, it's not the end of the world. But if you're round two, you can't go into round three. So it's going to be more of an issue.
Right. And other schools, again, also outside of the US, often have rolling admissions or have way more than 2 or 3 rounds. Like, for example, I know HEC has a 1 round every single month. Other schools in France typically have like 4 or even 5. So different models. There's a typical American timeline, which you have to go round 1, 2, and 3. But a lot of schools have differences. So again, it depends, right? There's a reason why.
Everything depends.
It's true. I mean, they're like, as a coach, as an author, I speak about trends. And there are a lot of things which hold up to those trends, but there's exceptions on both sides of the pond, meaning the Atlantic. But yeah, and let's say the Pacific as well. Okay, just a couple more questions. We're going to round off this episode. What if the referee doesn't end up saying only good things about the applicant? How much of an impact does that have on the application?
Actually, that's a good thing. In the United States, there's, with the exception of a few schools, there's something called the Common Letter of Recommendation. And basically all schools have the same letter of recommendation. And one of the questions is, can you give this candidate constructive feedback? And the thing that I mentioned to all my candidates is your recommender should not feel like they shouldn't be able to give you constructive feedback. Nobody is perfect. Everyone has something to learn. The CEO of the company has something to learn. In fact, if your recommender can't come up with something that you need to improve upon, they're probably not doing you justice, because they're probably going to wonder if all the wonderful things are so good in the first place. Now, that said, it depends what it is. You don't want them to say, oh, they're a horrible presenter or they don't get their work done. But if there's something where you need to improve, that's actually normal. And that actually makes the letter more genuine.
I agree. Yeah.
It's the Japanese idea, right? Of the broken fragment or the broken piece. Like they pour gold in it because that's where the most beauty and the uniqueness comes in. I forgot the name of it, but I think it's important because it's also, the schools don't want a perfect candidate, right? They want to be able to be there to help them become better selves, better business people.
Exactly. And also, if the worst thing that your recommender can say is the person works too hard, then one has to question, well, did they really believe all the wonderful things they said? I mean, is there no good, They gave them a review at the end of the year, most likely. Did they not have anything negative to say, anything to work on? Are they perfect? Are they ready to be CEO? Probably not.
To answer to Bara, she was talking about kintsugi. And kintsugi is this Japanese art of like when they break a vase or a bowl or something like that, they repair it with, I guess, liquid gold. And there's another layer of beauty and perfection that is seen in the imperfection. So I totally agree with that. Marlena asked a quick question to anyone in the room. Can anyone give examples of room for improvement?
Yeah. So, I mean, first of all, I'd say there's no one size fits all, but some of the common ones that I've seen are, especially because most of the candidates, have 3-4 years experience, fear of speaking in front of more senior people, fear of, having, bringing their ideas to the forefront. A lot of it is things that are not necessarily bad, but just things that they need to learn. So the rooms for improvement should be things that aren't going to hurt the candidate. So for example, being bad at math, probably not the best place to improve. But not feeling comfortable presenting at 25, that's actually okay.
Yeah. It's normal because you're young, so it's normal that it could be a bit intimidating, presenting in front of 50-year-olds, that have double your experience.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So things around leadership and really things that you could actually learn to do better in business school.
Yeah. Excellent. What else did I want to ask? Any other pitfalls to watch out for, and other tips you want to add to before we wrap up this episode?
Sure. The devil's in the detail. Everybody writes a good letter of reference. The schools don't care how good it is. What they want to hear is why the candidate's good. So the one watch out I would say is make sure that the referent or the referee, the person who's writing a reference knows that they need to do examples. Just saying that the person is wonderful is not going to help them at all.
Right.
What is the project they worked on? Why did they do such a good job at it? How did that help the company? Those are the things that the school wants to hear.
Nice. All right. Well, thanks. We have a comment coming in from another fantastic coach in our network, Candy Labal. She asks if this is being recorded, and indeed it is. Every episode is recorded and can be viewed on our YouTube channel, as well as on the MBAWaves.com website. Click on the tab Past Episodes. And we started doing these recorded at episode 30. It was like last December, I believe. So there's a whole lot of great content that's been recorded if you didn't make the live episode. But thank you, Pam, for joining us today. It was fantastic.
Thanks for having me. This is great.
As always, I learned a ton.
Yeah, I learned a lot. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, and thanks to the audience who joined us today, and everyone who's been a part of MBA Waves. We're working on year number 2. And be sure to join us next week for episode 52, which is about navigating the waitlist zone, rejections, do you reapply? And we have a great guest speaker, another admissions consultant, Lindsay Sage from Sage Admit, who'll be joining us. So looking forward to see you next week. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.